Our daily debate, and today we're asking, has Theresa May silenced the Brexit critics? Well, I'm joined by the Labour MP, Leave supporter and chair of Change Britain, Gisela Stewart, and the Conservative MP and Remain supporter, Anna Soubry. Well, Anna Soubry, you've certainly been one of the Brexit critics over the past few months.
Yeah, well, I'm moving on. We've got to get rid of all these terms now, haven't we? So, you know, Remainer and Leaver, because we're going to leave the European Union. Now we've got to make sure we get the best deal. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just think that people at home are getting really bored with a lot of this stuff now. And we don't want rehashes of all the old arguments. We need now to get the best deal. So we need to move it on.
What I was going to ask,
sorry, I said sorry
before you butted in.
No, I know, I'm very bad.
Has Theresa May's speech silenced some of the fears that you had about Brexit?
No, I think obviously I'm disappointed because I want us to stay in the single market, and I have no problem with that because I also believe in the free movement of labour. The two are incompatible at the moment, and what she's done, actually, I think that part of her speech was actually for the EU, because I think there was a real feeling over in Europe that we were trying to have our cake and eat it, and a lot of people had been talking an awful lot of nonsenses, and so she needed to say to them, look guys, I get this. I know that if I am determined, as she is, to end free movement from the EU, that means we can't be in the single market, and she needed to make that realistic call to Europe. And I think that will have gained her the respect that says, right, now you get it, let's now get into these negotiations, understanding what our red lines are on a realistic basis. That was the good side. The other great side of it was the tone in which she spoke, and it was much better than some of the tone from others, and indeed, if I may say, from her own tone in her own conference speech, which I did not think was good.
The tone in what sort of sense? Do you mean more conciliatory or tougher? Or?
No. I think she was... If you look at the opening passages in particular, when she was talking about what our country is and how we will always be a member of Europe, not the EU, but we will always be a member of Europe, that we are tolerant, and building tolerance is critical to the success of our country because we are still divided. You know, hate crime's still up 18% in my county of Nottinghamshire. So we need to bring people together, and I think she recognised that. This conciliation and building a consensus and getting rid of some of this old language of Remainer and Leaver and trying to bring people together to get the best deal. And that's what we need, and I congratulate that side of things absolutely.
Gisela Stewart, as someone who was someone who voted to leave the EU, sorry about using the old terminology.
Did, but that's fine.
What did you make of what did you make of Theresa May's speech?
Well, you know, Theresa May is a very significant figure, but nobody will ever silence Anna. I mean, let's agree on that one, even when we agree.
Yeah.
But I think there were three things which were very significant about this, and you know, Anna is right. It was the tone. She made it quite clear that all this talk about that this is about encouraging other countries to leave the European Union is wrong, and it's actually ill-founded. It is in no one's interest to destabilise the European Union. It's actually in our interest to ensure that the Euro countries, those who've got a single currency, integrate more deeply and do the things they need to do, as Frans Timmermans said in his interview. She spelled out some things which people needed to hear clearly. And she did allow us to move on from the debate. And following on Anna's example of, it's always been clear that free movement of labour and membership of the single market were utterly incompatible. I think that now allows us to move on to say that if you need an immigration system, what kind would we need? Because the country does need immigration. So we should move to one which is not based on geography, but is based on needs and skills. And we can start to flesh out some of the things which need yet to do. So I think she showed leadership. She made it clear that we can now be in a phase of rewriting rules. As when she talked about the customs union, she said whatever arrangements are now, no other country will be looking for the kind of deal we're looking for. And given the size of our economy and our interdependence, this is something which we can achieve. And I think in the rest of Europe, I looked at the press reports this morning. I mean, there was a relief that she spelt out what they thought needed to be spelt out.
And quite interesting to see what happened to the currency markets as well. Perhaps a bit of certainty, a bit more information is something that's been welcomed. She also made it quite clear in her speech that she believes no deal is better than a bad deal and that she is prepared to walk away.
Does that allow you? Well, yeah, of course it does. And I think actually the other thing that we need now to really understand is, because I don't think we'll get a new free trade deal, including the subtle variances in our membership of the customs union in 2 years. I mean, I just think that is fanciful, especially with the Dutch, German in particular, and also the French elections as well. That's why I wanted us to trigger Article 50 after the French and German elections in particular, but I lost that debate, right? Okay. Because what happens in those countries is critical, because it will actually exercise exactly some of these arguments, which we didn't really make in our referendum, about immigration. And so I know that a lot of Gisla's colleagues on the Labour backbenchers think, and I think there's some merit in this, that actually things are shifting in the EU when it comes to whether or not a member state could exercise more control over immigration. However, what really worries me is it's unrealistic that we're going to get this great deal in 2 years. And in that event, what we mustn't allow is to fall off the cliff edge and just go for nothing. That would be utterly wrong. And that's why I want us to put and factor into this, not just there's some new word for it, it's transition arrangement. It's got some new fancy word, I think. We need the time to get the best deal, and nobody should be wedded to, oh, we've got to do it all by 2019, or we're off ski without anything. That would be very bad.
But, you know, if there's there's that one institution which in the 20 years I've worked in it has been brilliant of making an agreement and then have transitional arrangements and delaying the final implementation but being quite clear what it will be. It's the European Union. So they have tremendous experience in that. But the important thing for us is that until Article 50 is triggered, our trade negotiators cannot start formal talks with other trade negotiators. And I think that's what we need to set the scene. But when she said about no deal is better than a bad deal, when you go into negotiations, you create the size of the envelope within which you negotiate. And I think she just created for herself the widest envelope possible, and that's a sign of a good negotiator.
No, absolutely right.
I'm quite keen, we haven't got much time left, but quite keen to get your thoughts as well on this idea that Theresa May would be prepared to cut taxes and regulation if she doesn't get a good deal. Is that a good idea, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nonsense being talked, do forgive me, especially from Gisla's party, not necessarily from Gisla, but there's a lot of rubbish being talked about workers' rights and so on and so forth. Not because I don't believe in workers' rights, I do. And they will be enshrined in British law. I think that's a complete and total red herring. What's important is that there's a flexible approach. That's the most important thing. And what Theresa May and rightly Philip Hammond are saying is that they're being realistic when it comes to this. Is that, and it's not idle threats. Of course, if we don't get what we want, then there are other alternatives, and I think it's the realism in the speech.
Is it something that concerns you, the idea of workers' rights being cut or taxes being cut?
I don't want them to be cut, the workers' rights.
But
on the Labour side, there's that kind of emotional attachment to the Delors Commission in the late 80s, when equal pay and those things came via the European Union and came because Margaret Thatcher denied them. But if you look at the last 20 years, labour rights in the United Kingdom actually have been ahead of what's been available in mainland Europe. Whether it's maternity rights, paternity rights, all those kind of things. And it will now be a question of the UK government. And I think workers' rights is something which, it's not just the left. It's a lot of the Tory colleagues as well think are important.
OK, Anna Soubry, Gisla Stuart, thanks very much for your thoughts.